American Top 40.
This is Casey Kasem in Hollywood, and now the current hit by the soul music superstar who put so much physical energy into each of his stage performances that last year he figures he lost more than a ton in body weight. By weighing himself before and after a performance, he found that he loses about 7 pounds per show. Well, during 1971, he worked 335 days, which means he worked off a total of 2,345 pounds. Now, this year, he'll lose only about 1,400 pounds because he's holding his schedule down to just 200 shows, kind of taking it easy. His current hit is at number 19 this week, Get on the Good Foot, Part 1. Weighing in at 162, here's James Brown.
Get past the people, get past the hitman.
At number 19 for the second week in a row, 6th week on American Top 40, James Brown with Get on the Good Foot, Part 1, and the countdown rolls out.
Hits from coast to coast.
American Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem. Now, let's turn a page in the AT40 book of records from the ridiculous to the sublime. Holding the all-time record for having the most top 40 hits without ever reaching number 1 ought to be a very frustrating distinction. But for the man who holds that title, how can it be? He never took aim at the pop chart. He makes his music for soul fans, and the measure of his success is that he holds the record for most number 1s on the soul chart, 17 of them, and has been revered for a generation as the godfather of soul. The fact that he does hold the record for the most top 40s on the pop chart without a number 1, he has 43, just goes to show the tremendous crossover appeal of his music. His biggest pop hit went to number 3 in 1965. Here it is, I Got You by James Brown.
Wow, I feel good. I knew that I wouldn't.
From 1965, that's I Got You by the King of Soul and Prince of Pop, James Brown, the artist with the most top 40 hits without a number 1. 43 of them.
The hits from coast to coast.
Now we're up to the song Living in America. It's by the superstar millionaire whose beginnings were as humble as you can get. He was born in 1933 during the Great Depression just outside Augusta, Georgia. Grew up in a broken-down shack that his family rented for just $7 a month. His father was a roaming blues singer who didn't make much money. And this superstar can remember that when he was a kid in the early 40s during World War II, he used to walk the railroad tracks in the wintertime searching for stray pieces of coal that had fallen off the passing trains. He'd take the coal home and his family would use it to keep the tiny shack warm. That's the way it was more than 40 years ago for James Brown. James didn't exactly leap into his singing career either. When he was young, he says he made some big mistakes. He stole, and that landed him in jail. After he got out, he tried a career as a boxer, but that didn't work out. His thing, he found out, was singing and dancing. He started performing in the early 1950s, and his determination, hard work, and a lot of raw talent eventually took him out of poverty and on his way to superstardom. James Brown became the soul act, and one of the biggest acts on the pop chart. Rolling Stone magazine says in the 60s, he virtually reshaped dance music. End of quote. And the musical shockwaves that James Brown sent out back then are still felt in the funky sounds of today. His current pop and soul hit is at number 7, moving up 2 notches this week on American Top 40. Here he is, James Brown, and Living in America. And you sound good, too, James. James Brown, Living in America, climbing 2 notches to number 7, his 44th top 40 hit, as the countdown continues.
The hits from coast to coast.
Now, I have the rags to riches story of a music legend. A lot of people know what it's like to be poor, and some know what it's like to be rich, but only a few have lived at both extremes. One of them is a man in our countdown this week, a superstar who grew up in the 1930s in a poor black family in rural Georgia. As a little kid, he'd take any kind of work for just a few cents. One of his jobs was shining shoes. Barefoot, he'd walk into Augusta to his favorite spot in town in front of a radio station, WRTW, and he'd shine shoes for a nickel a shine all day. He did that till he was 14. Later, still in his teens, he got in trouble with the law and served time in jail. When he got out, he tried professional boxing and a few other jobs. Then he discovered that his talent was in song and dance, and his struggle to make it in show business began. He was in his mid-20s by the time he got his first soul hit, called Please, Please, Please. That was in 1956. And the rest of his story? Well, the rest is rock and roll history. He's one of those legends who was recently inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. James Brown. And remember that radio station where he once shined shoes? Well, in the late 60s, he bought it. James owned 3 radio stations, and he ran them for about 10 years before selling them. Just one of his many side businesses. The main business of James Brown is show business. On his current hit, James sings, "You might not be looking for the promised land, but you might just find it anyway." Here's James Brown, Living in America.
I feel good.
A one-of-a-kind James Brown on American Top 40, falling from 17 to 26 with his recent Top 5 hit, Living in America, from the Rocky IV soundtrack, as the countdown continues.
The hits from